Jesus himself stood among them. They were startled, terrified, and thought they were seeing a ghost. A year or so ago, a friend of mine died. One morning in his 68th year, he simply didn't wake up. It was about as easy a way as he could possibly have done it. But it was not easy for the people he left behind because it gave us no chance to start getting used to the idea or to say goodbye. He died in March, and in May, my wife and I were staying with his widow overnight when I had a short dream about him. I dreamed he was standing there in the dark guest room where we were asleep, looking very much himself in the navy blue jersey and white slacks he often wore. I told him how much we had missed him and how glad I was to see him again. He acknowledged that somehow. And then I said, "Are you really there, Dudley?" I meant, was he there in fact, in truth? Or was I merely dreaming he was? His answer was that he really was there. "Can you prove it?" I asked him. "Well, of course," he said. And then he plucked a strand of wool out of his jersey and he tossed it to me. I caught it between my thumb and forefinger, and the feel of it was so palatably real that it woke me up. That's all there was to it. I told the dream at breakfast the next morning, and I had hardly finished when my wife spoke. She said that she had seen the strand on the carpet as she was getting dressed. She was sure it hadn't been there the night before. I rushed upstairs to see for myself, and there it was, a little tangle of navy blue. This is the way writer Frederick Buechner describes a moment, a wistful, intrusive moment of transcendence in a writing called The Clown in the Belfry. I don't know how to make sense of Buechner writing in this case. I don't know what I think. I know that he makes me squirm when I read some of the story. It makes me squirm. After all, we are people of facts, right? This is tax day. Though Caesar's given you 2 more days. That's how gracious Caesar is to take your money. The IRS, they're interested in facts. They want to know what the facts are, what the truth is. And you, because you're people of great moral conscience and are benevolent in every way, you want to be sure to deal with the facts and to be generous with them. Right? I noticed there's a weak amen in there somewhere, right? Facts. That's how we are. We deal with facts. Objectivity, things that are measurable. It is a part of our inheritance from the Enlightenment. We are reasonable people. And when somebody shares a story, a very real story about something that we're not sure is factual, it makes us squirm. It makes us uneasy. It's not rational, we tell ourselves. It's not that we distrust somebody like Fred Buechner, who's a wonderful person, incredible writer. I went to hear him one time. He's one of those people he's a bore as a speaker, but as long as you're reading him, he's beautiful. So I don't distrust him. I would say as a modern person, maybe even a postmodern person, I distrust maybe his interpretation of the facts. as to whether such a thing happens. Maybe, just maybe, however, these mysterious moments that take place are a fluke or a quirk. Maybe they are coincidences, right? We tell ourselves that. But maybe they're meant to disrupt our assumptions about life and our assumptions that we know all there is to know about life here and beyond. That's why we become a little uneasy. We want to keep the assumptions that we have control, that we know what we know. I don't know how many times I have heard people in my family who would say that. I know what I know. I know you don't have family members like that. No matter what it is, we are people who want to honor understandings of matter. We want things that we can handle. We want things that we can chew, especially if it's good to chew on. We like things that, we can feel, we can see, things that we assume can be tested by objective understandings. And it bothers us that maybe in the midst of that, God is some kind of holy tease, challenging us with those moments, challenging our senses and our assumptions. What I found is that people who work in chaplains who work in hospitals, I should not say just chaplains, because there are people who are medically trained, or people who work in hospice situations, where in that Celtic spirituality understanding, they kind of get that there are places, and I would not just say places, but times where there is a thinness between what we think we know and what is on the other side of that understanding. I can't tell you how many stories that I've heard. I went to seminary with a guy named Mac. He was Free Will Baptist, and he'd gone to a little junior college. Then it was a junior college. And then, because he was trying to go to school and support a family, he hustled pool to get through Duke. Graduated from Duke with no debt, supporting a family. He was that good. Which is why during chapel breaks, when everybody else was in chapel and we were trying to find a way to shoot pool, I never chose to shoot against Mac. But Mac was interested in doing chaplaincy work, and so he started with doing his CPE in the hospital, and then he went on to work at his internship and graduated from seminary, and then he became a one who trains people in the CPE. But I remember him telling a story, because we share lots of stories. We did our initial training, Mac and I, not in a hospital context, but in a state mental institution, Dorothea Dix Hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's not a good place necessarily to get, a good feel for what the norm is. Though, as I told Mac one day coming home from class, maybe we're getting a good feel for what life in the church is going to be like. Matt came in one day toward the end of his seminary days, and he sat down and he had this look on his face. And he was still processing something that had happened the day before, something that I'm sure is really easily explained by medical people. He had been walking with someone through a time of a journey toward the end. And this was a person who had a very conservative theology, and Mac had understood that, but he had transitioned into a more progressive place. And so he kept saying to this young man, I understand what you're saying about the sweet by and by, but But Mac was trying to get him to talk about his feelings and process the journey as he went along the way, trying to be a good pastoral, therapist. As it turned out, nothing changed. This was the faith that was sustaining this young man during his journey into those final moments. The mother had the same place theologically. They belonged to the same church, and she was in that journey as well. And so as he took his final breath and as Mac stood beside the bed, he prayed with the mother. And there was that moment of, I know some of you may find it strange to say, but there can be moments of real holiness in those closing times. I know for a lot of us, we're scared to death about thinking about the end, but there are people who journey in amazing ways. And he stood there with the mom. He held her hand. And he tried then to do what he ought not to have tried, and that is he tried to move her forward. She said, "He's going to cry now." And Mac said, "No, Ms. whatever her name was, he's not. He's died. And they will be here to get the body soon. Why don't we go back out and sit in the chapel office and kind of just wait for that?" "No, he's going to cry now." And Mac said, "Well, they'll be here soon, and so I don't know that we want to wait." She said, "No, he's going to cry now." And so Mac then looked at me with a face completely white, just void of any blood anywhere. And he said, suddenly, a tear rolled down the cheek of the person who had died. And so, being a good pastoral care person, I said, "Well, Mac, how did you feel about that?" He said, I can't say exactly what he said. Seminarians sometimes are graphic. But he did say this. He says, "It scared," and I'll change the rest, "the daylights out of me. It just freaked me out." You see, he had talked then to nurses and doctors, and they had medical reasons why that happened. They're probably right. Probably. But was it possible that she knew something that they didn't know about that transitioning from one place to the other? Could it be that the mother was dealing with something more than facts? That holy moment? Maybe. Maybe not. But it is the kind of experience that people have. You know, those moments when you know what you know and suddenly you're not sure you know it anymore. It's a strange thing that takes place. Maybe God comes from beyond in ways that we don't understand. And those ways can be strange and unsettling to those of us who have all the facts at our command, who have control of our lives and understand everything we need to understand. Maybe, or maybe not. Reason will sustain us for the rest of our lives, and we have no need to consider coincidences and quirks and such. Maybe. Maybe we don't see God among us each day because we've lost the capacity to look around us with eyes and hearts open to wonder. And we miss those hints of the presence of God, those moments from the other side, because we have no one who encourages us to look. When I go to art museums, apologies to those of you who the first thing you do is rent the little thing to go in your ears. I hate those things. I want to go and experience the art with my senses. And then I may be ready to come back and put those earbuds in, because sometimes I need a guide to help me then see what I haven't seen before. Maybe it's that way with wonder and mystery. Sometimes we need somebody who will not just give us the facts, but say, how did you experience that? What did that feel like? What do you think that was about? Folk who stay open and raise those hard questions can often drive clergy to distraction, because you want us to know. You want us to have the facts at our command. You want us to understand what there is to understand God. But this morning I'm standing before you feeling a little like Fred Buechner. I've journeyed too far and too long, said goodbye to too many people, said hello to strangers who would later end up changing my life when I didn't see anything but somebody who was passing by shaking my hand. Had those moments when I just didn't know what had taken place, but something had taken place. I've been blessed, and maybe you have too, by having met someone, just met him, some figure. And when I shook a hand and passed by, I sensed the holy. Happened to me one time when I just was in a crowd of people at a church in Washington, D.C., and Bishop Tutu passed by and happened to shake my hand. And I felt something that I can't tell you what it is. It's interesting, isn't it? So the disciples, they were gathered there. And it was a Sunday evening. They were huddled together. They were despondent. They were anxious. They were fearful over what had happened those 3 days in Jerusalem. Wow, so much. They had seen him die. Oh, I wasn't that close to the cross, actually, one of them maybe said. I was to the back, but from where I was standing, he looked pretty dead to me. And then, as one writer has said, they stood around talking and talked about the good campaign. They'd tried to get him elected as Messiah, but it just had come short. And suddenly, they became aware of a stranger in their midst, standing among them. Peace. But they felt anything but peace. They were startled. They were terrified. Some of them thought, it's a ghost. The intruder came by and invited them to touch his hands and touch his feet, to know that he was no ghost. And the stranger asked for something to eat. And before their wondering eyes, he ate a piece of fish. And then, as John tells it, he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures. And they became witnesses. They saw, they touched, they believed. Jesus had come back to them, and they could scarcely catch their breath. He had given them what they needed. to move on to the next holy place. But there was the majority. You know, the majority of the people who were polled, and they said it had to be some kind of coincidence. Maybe it was something in the wine. Hysteria induced by reaction to grief. Post-traumatic stress syndrome, I'm sure. There had to be a good reason. Maybe. And maybe not. Waiting.